By 1940, Europe was divided between Stalin in the east and Hitler in the west.
With the actions of Hitler and Stalin in Europe, Americans were divided on how to respond to the war. Americans who favored isolationism didn't want to aid the Allies or send American boys to fight and die in a European conflict. Americans who favored intervention wanted to send aid to the Allies and isolate the aggressors. Although FDR favored intervention, he had to listen to the American people, who strongly supported isolationism.
Eager to bring about a swift end to the war in the Western Front, Hitler turned his attention now to Great Britain. FDR felt enormous pressure to aid Great Britain in its fight against Germany. FDR thought if Great Britain could be aided by US supplies and win the war on its own, then the United States would not have to be forced to send American boys to die in Europe. Roosevelt convinced Congress to dramatically increase the defense budget and gear up for war. The next step taken was the Lend-Lease Plan. With Great Britain out of cash, the Lend-Lease Act allowed the Allies to borrow arms and supplies. It was impossible for us to allow them to continue to buy arms because they were out of cash. Therefore, we simply let them borrow them, on the premise that they return them when the war is done. FDR was doing anything he could to keep Great Britain in the fight.
Aware that the United States was aiding their enemy, Germany and Italy responded by allying with Japan to form the Axis powers. This was meant to threaten the United States with a two-front war. A two-front war would make the United States have to divide their troops between the Atlantic and the Pacific. This would deplete their forces, making it more difficult to win.
In 1941, the United States enforced economic sanctions against Japan to punish them for their military takeover of Asian colonies. Most impactful was the United States cutting off of oil exports to Japan. Japan desperately needed oil in order to fuel their massive military and to further their imperial conquest in Asia and the Pacific.
The Japanese military began to devise an attack plan against the United States in the Pacific. They targeted the U.S. Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The bulk of the U.S. Pacific Fleet was stationed at Pearl Harbor. Japan's major targets were American battleships, aircraft carriers, and aircraft. Following the attack, the United States' defeat was complete. Nearly 2,400 servicemen were killed in action. All of the United States battleships were out of action, either destroyed or damaged, and the Pacific Air Force was crippled. Pearl Harbor became a rallying cry for the United States. Americans were devastated and furious, and they were ready to fight till the end.
No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
December 1943, with Hitler trying to reinforce Italy in a bloody stalemate, and his troops in full retreat in the east, the Big Three, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, met in Tehran, Iran, at the Tehran Conference. At the conference, the leaders of the three Allied powers committed to opening up a new front in the west by invading northern France, with the Soviet Red Army applying pressure in the Eastern Front, and Allied forces working their way to Germany's border in the south. The Allied powers decided that the time had come to invade northern France and therefore open up a new front in the west, thus surrounding Hitler on three sides. From here, the pressure could be applied to finally end the war in Europe. But the plan was given the codename Operation Overlord, and the command of the operation was given to the Supreme Allied Commander, U.S. General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Over 3 million U.S., British, and Canadian troops assembled in Great Britain and prepared for the assault. Operation Overlord was given the codename D-Day. On June 6, 1944, Allied forces attacked the beaches of Normandy, France.
Although the invasion of France was very successful, there were many costs associated with it. The Allies suffered an estimated 10,000 casualties at Normandy. By early July, the Allies had landed nearly 1 million troops and 180,000 vehicles in France. The tanks and supplies that landed would be the forces that would push into France and Germany and help to end the war. By August, General George S. Patton's Third Army had rolled into France. On August 25, 1944, US and French forces liberated Paris and drove the Nazis into retreat. By September of 1944, the Western Front had been ripped open and Germany was in retreat. By summer of 1944, Germany was retreating on all fronts. Soviets were driving into the German heartland in the east. Americans, the British, the French were pushing into the Reich into the west. But as they advanced, they found the horrors of the Holocaust. Allied troops liberated Nazi death camps on the western and eastern fronts. The Soviets were the first to find the atrocities of concentration camps in Poland. 6 million Jews were killed in mass executions in concentration camps. To cover up the evidence, Germans cremated and buried massive amounts of bodies. Prior to these discoveries, FDR had been reluctant to accept Jewish refugees to America. He allowed Jews of special merit, such as Albert Einstein and Robert Oppenheimer, to enter America, but denied the average refugee. The Holocaust was one of the most tragic atrocities in the history of the world. By